This is Technically Legal, a podcast about legal technology, innovation in the legal industry, and the impact tech is having on the law. I'm Chad Main, the founder of legal services company Percipient, and on this episode, I'm talking to attorney Chris Edgar, who's also the founder of Filmtracts. That's a DIY platform that indie filmmakers can use to create entertainment-based contracts for their projects. On this episode, the subject matter is something we don't talk a lot about on this podcast, entertainment law. I'm talking to Chris Edgar. He's an attorney and the founder of Filmtracts. Chris fills us in about his career path, where he started as a clerk for a future Supreme Court justice. Then he jumped to big law to do litigation, but he realized that maybe that type of career wasn't what he was looking for. That's because the world of entertainment law and independent film production was calling him. In 2010, Chris left the big law life and threw out his own shingle so he could help filmmakers with their legal issues. A few years later, he and a partner launched their own indie film production company, at which he quickly figured out that making films was his true passion. When other indie filmmakers that Chris talked to figured out he was an attorney, he was pretty quickly getting peppered with legal questions. But often the people asking the questions couldn't necessarily afford his services as an attorney, so that's when he decided to launch Filmtracts. Filmtracts is a SaaS-based app that Chris built, which is a self-serve repository of film-related contracts that users can tailor to the needs of their project, and depending on what type of subscription they buy, they can also get a few hours of legal consultation from Chris. You're in entertainment law, but initially you weren't.
Yes, that's right.
You were in big law for a while, but more interestingly, you courted for Justice Alito, but I think he was at the appellate court and not the Supreme Court, right?
That's right. He was a judge on the Third Circuit Court of Appeals.
What was your interest in law school? What did you study undergrad, and how did you end up going to law school?
As an undergrad, I was really into debate. I was president of my debate team, and all of the sort of seniors, when I was a freshman, all these guys who I looked up to as great debaters and so on, they were all going to law school. And I said, if I could debate for a living, that'd be really exciting. And that's why I got into commercial litigation. I worked at a big law firm after law school for that reason. But eventually, and it did bear some similarities to debating professionally, although, debate doesn't involve quite as much legal research and writing and talking on the phone and email and so on. But I think I decided at one point, when I was in the office at 2:00 in the morning, I don't know if I want to be a professional debater. I don't necessarily know if this is for me. After about, 4 years of doing it.
And so then, how'd you get the clerkship? Was that right out of school, or was it after you had practiced for a while?
Yeah, that was the year right after law school. So I did the typical thing where I applied either in the second or third year. I don't quite remember which it was.
Had this something you've been planning on in law school? You want to do clerkship before you made the jump into the professional world, or?
Yeah, because at the time I wanted to either be a legal academic or I wanted to be like a commercial litigation partner. I was kind of on the fence about that. And I thought, well, either way, the clerkship's going to be helpful to me.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And has it been? Has it opened doors for you?
Because I am basically outside the conventional legal career path, I think it's hard for me to say.
Right.
After I spent 4 years at the big law firm, I left and started my own just solo law practice, which I've basically been doing since then. And I started to get more focused on the creative side of things myself. Now I have a production company that I run with the business partner because I just couldn't stay out of the independent film and sort of music arena myself. So I guess you could say I have kind of a dual career at this point.
You're at the big law firm. You've got this creative background. You're a musician. You just didn't like big law. Did you always have aspirations to get back in entertainment law? Was that kind of the plan, or you just thought you'd try out big law for a while and then switch gears?
I don't think I was that excited by the prospect of doing entertainment law at the time. I interviewed with a couple of entertainment law-focused firms when I was in law school. And, the idea of negotiating contracts for movie stars and so forth didn't really appeal to me as much as actually being involved in the creative side. But then I started to meet all these people in indie film. I would sort of reluctantly reveal to them that in addition to producing independent films and doing music for them and so on, I was also an attorney. And they would say, oh, well, can you help me with this particular legal question? Because everyone in independent film has legal questions, or they all have like hundreds of them. And eventually I decided, well, I probably should get paid to deal with all these requests for legal opinions that I'm constantly getting from independent filmmakers. And so, that's kind of how my entertainment law practice was born, out of being involved in the creative side of indie film.
And how long ago was that?
Well, I've been practicing law as a solo practitioner for probably 15 years, but I started to get more focused on entertainment matters, I think, 8 or 9 years ago. And I discovered that I really enjoyed the transactional side of law, as opposed to litigation, as opposed to fighting. which was something that I didn't anticipate would be true, again, when I was in law school. It all had to be about debating professionally. And then I realized, actually, if I'm working with someone to really bring their creative vision to life, that actually is pretty rewarding. That might even be more rewarding than trying to write the most venomous, briefs possible or something of that nature.
So for the first 4 or 5 years you practiced, were you doing the litigation? Were you litigation focused?
Yeah, I still have some clients from Silicon Valley where we're doing either sort of pre-litigation advice or we're doing litigation. And then I think I decided, well, because of the focus that I'm going to bring to projects like that, it's going to end up being just as all-consuming as being at the big law firm was, which I don't really want to do, particularly if I don't have the same sort of infrastructure
Right.
that I had at the big law firm. It's like, so at a certain point, I said to myself, well, I've either got to go back to the big law firm or I have to pursue maybe a different direction and do something that allows me to merge my involvement in the creative side of law with more traditional law practice.
And you also have a film production company. When and how did that come to be?
When I moved to LA, which was about 8 years ago, I was working on a project called The Breakout Iraq Opera, which was a musical that I wrote that had a very brief run in theaters in San Francisco. And then I decided that I wanted to bring that to the big screen. So that's how I first got introduced to Jen Page, who is now my sort of business and film production partner. We just hit it off over our mutual love of movie musicals and sort of music-oriented entertainment content. And since then, we've been just making projects like that.
How many movies have you put out so far? Or I should say produced?
Well, I tend to be kind of full service in the independent film space. Like if I'll do, I'll compose music for the film, then inevitably I'll get involved in some aspect of the legal side. In terms of music, I've done something like 22 or 23 films. As a writer-director, I'm actually about to direct my third film. We're going to start shooting it at the end of this month. So I think I've packed a lot of involvement in films into the last 8 or 9 years. And it's become one of my favorite things to do. I didn't think I really had the personality to direct films, but, I've really been bitten by the directing bug just really by chance. I was talking to Jen about the possibility of her directing because she was usually the director in our indie filmmaking relationship. And she said to me, this one is really your baby. You wrote the script and you understand it best. So you really should direct, which I hadn't contemplated at all before. And so I kind of fell into directing as a result. But it's working for me so far. It's exciting. After I finish directing a project, even if I'm doing something really mundane, like I'm walking around the Target, I'm like, yeah, that's right. I just directed a film.
Well, that's cool. But you just said that you didn't think you had the personality for it. It seems like maybe as a preconceived notion, you proved yourself wrong. What was it about you didn't think was going to fit that mold of being a director?
Well, it's funny. I mean, despite doing commercial litigation, I've never thought of myself as a really aggressive sort of person. And I thought that kind of aggression would be what would be necessary to be a director. I'm actually not sure about that. I think I can lead people in a somewhat non-traditional way, or to use a kind of business cliche, to kind of lead from behind. I think I do that in the context of directing, and it's worked for me so far.
When we come back in just a couple minutes, Chris tells us about the launch of Filmtracts. I'm Chad Main, and you're listening to Technically Legal.
We need to do more with less. That is the key takeaway nowadays from almost every survey of in-house counsel. But what if it didn't have to be that way? What if you actually could do more for less? By combining legal expertise and technology, Percipient enables legal teams to get more work done for less. Buried in contracts and sales is frustrated with turnaround time? We can help with that. Did you just get hit with a subpoena and reviewing 100,000 documents and files will tax your resources or cost you a small fortune in billable hours? We can help there too. Our team of legal professionals leverage tech and project management principles with the right amount of human oversight to deliver precise, efficient, and cost-effective legal solutions. Whether it's legal operations and contract management support, subpoena compliance, or document review, Percipient is your partner in really doing more for less. Percipient. Legal services powered by technology.
We'll get back to my conversation with Filmtracts founder Chris Edgar in just a second. But before we do, I want to direct you to tlpodcast.com. That's the website dedicated to this podcast. On that site, you'll find individual web pages for every episode we've done with more information about our guests and links to some of the stuff we talk about. If you want to get a hold of me, you can email me at cmain@percipient.co. That's CMAIN@percipient.co, or catch me on LinkedIn or X. All right, let's get back to my conversation with Chris Edgar. He's just about to fill us in on the founding of his company, Filmtracts.
It's the indie filmmaker's classic dilemma, where they don't want to pay hundreds of dollars an hour to an entertainment lawyer, but they also don't want to go, Googling for contracts that may or may not be relevant to their situation and just kind of use them. And there are of course, a bunch of sites that you can use that predated Filmtracts by many years, where you can enter information into a form and it'll spit out a contract for you. But those sites really, my sense from just evaluating them myself, because I wanted to have something to refer prospective clients to if they didn't want to pay for legal services. It looks like the people who prepared them don't really have knowledge of how independent film contracts actually work. Like instead of a talent agreement or an agreement for a crew member, for instance, they'll have something that's called like a talent release. It's just like a release of the talent's rights associated with the film and then an amount of payment, and that's it. That would be a typical kind of document that I would see, but even a talent agreement in film is a somewhat more complicated animal. And so I decided to create a site where the site actually uses conditional logic to produce the contracts. In other words, if you say, you'll get asked on these questions on the form, for instance, will the actor get contingent compensation for appearing in the film? And if you say no to that question, then all of the provisions that would have been there covering contingent compensation are no longer there. Whereas in some of these contracts that you see on other sites, there's a paragraph that deals with contingent compensation, and you have to say in your answer on the form, or if you say that the actor won't receive contingent compensation, then the agreement that you get is going to say that the actor will receive 0% of the net profits, which of course is not the way that any self-respecting lawyer would draft the contract. They wouldn't put anything in about net profits if the actor's not going to get any. So the conditional logic aspect of it is one of the things that sets it apart, I think.
It is film only, not other entertainment pursuits at this point.
Right. That's also true. I mean, even though I represent some clients who are not in the film space, who, they're working on books or they're independent music artists, I wanted to have something that was specifically focused on independent filmmakers because they're the ones who are always giving me questions about contracts and about, what provisions they should have in them and how they should negotiate with talent and crew and so on.
I don't oversimplify it. I don't want to, by no means, try to belittle what your site does, but I like to kind of conceptualize what a company does by analogy. Am I wrong to say when I was looking at it, I kind of felt like it was LegalZoom, but with a very specific focus for independent film contracts? Is that a fair way of describing what it is?
Or one aspect of LegalZoom where you can basically fill out a form and give either yes or no or multiple choice answers to questions, and then that will generate a contract for you. So the concept of doing that is not completely novel, but the focus on independent film, like you were saying,
right.
I think that is actually unique, which I was initially surprised by.
And that's the great niche, right? Because if you go, I bet you a lot of people were working on LegalZoom. Hey, I'm going to start an independent film. Where do I go? LegalZoom, they find something that maybe is tertiary to their rights. There's definitely a need. It's an interesting void you're filling.
And I really wanted, to have something to refer my clients to when they didn't feel like they could pay legal fees, but they wanted to get contracts that had been vetted by an attorney. And so essentially I used the contracts that I had previously used for clients as templates on Filmtracts in order to assist those independent filmmakers who didn't want to spend, $300 to $500 an hour for somebody to put together contracts.
And how does it work? How do you charge? If I can't afford a lawyer and I'm putting together a film, what can I expect to pay if I get my agreements from Filmtracts?
Well, there are a couple of different subscription plans. One is a free subscription where you can basically purchase contracts on an a la carte basis. You would pay $7.95, that is $7.95, for each contract that you generate using this form that I talked about and then download. And you can send that to an unlimited number of people. And you can also make whatever edits to the contract that you want in case there is some aspect of the Filmtracts system that doesn't end up producing exactly what you want. Then there's a monthly subscription plan where you get access to unlimited contracts, and you can send them to whoever you want and download them as many times as you want. Finally, there's another subscription plan where you can get 1 hour per month of consultation with me, just about whatever your legal contract related needs might be, in addition to getting the ability to download and create unlimited contracts. So we've got 3 subscription plans that indie filmmakers can choose from.
Let's talk about that last tier where you also give some consultation. Okay, so I go on the website, I create an agreement, then I schedule a time with you. Are you looking at the contract and asking questions, maybe giving them suggestions about how they can tighten it up or change a couple things because maybe they didn't know how to answer the question? What's all involved in the consultation?
Well, realistically, I end up answering whatever entertainment law questions people have, whether or not it has to do with the
Right.
contract that's been generated using the site, which is fine with me. And it's also, frankly, a way that sometimes I pick up clients because they'll want to ask me other entertainment law questions and so on. So it's kind of like a teaser rate for an hour in a sense. So really, it runs the gamut from what kind of offer should I make to this talent, like that's a conversation that I've had, or do I really need to provide all of these legal deliverables that are in this distribution agreement that I've just been given regarding my independent film? That's a big aspect of my practice, by the way, is helping people with the distribution of their independent film, because there are so many requirements as far as what they need to deliver to the film distributor that it's almost like a winner's curse. When you get the opportunity to distribute your film, you end up having to spend thousands of dollars on things like E&O insurance and so forth, and provide a copyright report and a title report and all these additional things you didn't think you were going to have to pay for when you started making the film.
Oh, it's interesting. So let's talk about the stack. Let's go underneath the hood. How did you develop it? What was the first thing you did to put the software in place, to put the website out there so people could start using it?
It's a WordPress site. I worked with a professional WordPress developer, actually a couple of different WordPress developers. Thankfully, I was able to find someone who had experience working on websites that would generate PDFs in response to input entered by the user. So it was actually relatively easy to create. And I also created a YouTube channel that's called Filmtracts, where I comment on various entertainment law issues. So that's kind of a component of the whole Filmtracts brand. But yeah, I mean, as far as the development goes, it was all done in WordPress. Oh, and also WooCommerce, which is a typical plugin that's used for WordPress that just allows people to make transactions with the site.
Payments coming through WooCommerce.
Yes. And the payments are processed through Stripe, which is one of the options that you can select in WooCommerce. So, I mean, this kind of site was not really reinventing the wheel to the developers that I worked with. Thankfully, they were able to get it done pretty inexpensively.
That's an interesting point, though, because you're filling a void. It's a sophisticated void, but what you're providing is just contract templates, which the content's sophisticated, but the delivery doesn't have to be. And I think some people, they start thinking about tech, not just legal tech, but any tech. They got to make the most fancy thing with bells and whistles. But if you think about it, some of our favorite apps we use every day are probably very simple, right? You don't need to overcomplicate something for it to be good.
Yeah, that's true. And I deliberately wanted to keep this as simple as I could so that the indie filmmakers wouldn't need to gain a lot of legal knowledge themselves in order to understand how to use it. And they could just answer basic questions like, what's the percentage of the profits that the actor is going to receive, for instance. And there are some issues where I need to provide a little bit of technical explanation. Like I'll ask users, do you want to have a provision that provides the winning party in any lawsuit arising out of the contract will get attorney's fees? So I wrote some narrative text explaining what that means at a high level, or something like, do you want any disputes regarding the contract to have to be heard in a particular forum? Or do you want, a particular state's law to apply? So there are a few technical legal issues that inevitably the filmmaker is going to have to learn a little bit about to understand these contracts. But I mean, for the most part, it's accessible to the layperson.
Well, it should be, because that's who you're catering to, right? So how many contract types are on the website?
23. But we're constantly, soliciting suggestions. We definitely want to hear if there's some kind of contract that's not covered on there so that we can add it.
How many do you find you're adding every month or every couple months?
The site has been live now for 3 or 4 months. I think we've added about 3 per month, and just based on the suggestions I got from beta testers, because we only recently got out of the sort of beta phase. And thankfully, there are a lot of independent filmmakers who are very interested in getting affordable contracts for their projects. So there was no shortage of suggestions.
How often are you finding you have to go back and tweak the template or the instructions or the contract you have existing on the site?
There were a couple of people who would give me suggestions like, you should have a provision that says that covers what will happen if the project doesn't get made. Like the production company isn't guaranteeing that the project is going to be shot, for instance. And so I've added that in. There have definitely been a lot of useful suggestions from the indie film community. Thankfully, I'm on the board of a nonprofit organization called Black Magic Collective, which is basically, it has the purpose of filmmaking education And so I was just able to get suggestions from a bunch of people who were involved in that.
Yeah, I was going to ask you, do you do with, like, for lack of a better word, peer review? Like, hey, come and take a look at my templates, see if I missed anything or have a different angle?
I've definitely tried to ask for as much feedback as I can from other filmmakers. And then I can get some testimonials out of that because they tend to be happy that this kind of thing exists. So yeah, the more feedback as far as I'm concerned, the better.
What's on the roadmap? Future plans?
I would love to keep expanding the number of contracts that we offer on the site. Something that Jen and I have been talking about is trying to really create an independent filmmaking education hub, which you could say that Blackmagic Collective is to a certain extent, although that's a nonprofit. So we need to do something separate that's for profit, where we'll offer courses, I mean, maybe in the form of 5-minute videos or maybe an hour-long videos involving courses on, let's say, camera operation and editing and lights and so forth. And then we combine that with a tool like Filmtracts so that we can provide the sort of ultimate indie filmmaker education package.
Well, that's great. Any takeaways or something you learned from creating your own website / tech company that you didn't expect to learn?
Despite, as we were talking about, this being a relatively simple tool, I can understand why these tech companies, it always struck me as funny, like, these tech companies that are putting out what seem like relatively simple apps, they just got $5 million of VC investment and they need to hire 20 employees. Do they really need that? And now I can certainly see why this kind of work, developing this site, is a large team-oriented job, particularly if you want to solicit feedback and you want to constantly be making edits based on the feedback that you get. I mean, for Filmtracts, I don't think that I would need $5 million of VC investment, but I could certainly understand why tech entrepreneurs seek those kinds of investments in ways that I couldn't before.
Chris, thanks for coming on the show. If people want to get a hold of you, they want to learn more about Filmtracts, where should they go?
To C. Edgar, that's CEDGAR, at cedgarlaw.com.
And of course, it's filmtracts.com, right?
Filmtracts.com is the address of the site, that's right.
Okay, that's a wrap for today's episode. As always, we really appreciate you listening. If you want to subscribe, you can find us on most major podcast platforms like Apple, Spotify, Google, Stitcher, etc. Also, if you like us enough, I hope you leave us a favorable review. Thanks again for listening. Until next time, this has been Technically Legal.